Alright, so this is going to take us into the end of Chapter 8, Lesson 10. Tomorrow you'll start your math test. You'll have all the lessons that we've done that you've taken notes on to help you get an A on your test the first time around. Not answering questions tomorrow on your test. The following day I'll give them back to you and I'll have any mark that you miss. Hopefully you won't miss any. You won't have any corrections to make at all. Use your book. Use the glossary. Look at the notes we've taken, including today's lesson. You should be fine. On that day that I give them back for corrections, we're also going to go 2 more lessons beyond 8.10. I'll call them 8.11 and 8.12 even though they're not in the book. But the lessons in Go Math are really good when it comes to inequalities and give you the foundation. But I have to go deeper because you're going to go deeper on NWEA, on ISTEP. But more importantly to me, you're going to go deeper in 7th grade. And I want you to have a good, strong foundation to be successful next year. So when we talk about graphing inequalities, we're talking about doing this kind of stuff. Hopefully you'll remember learning this before Christmas break. It's just going back over those things that I've already taught. But I'm going to spend a little extra time explaining it, so this video might be a little longer than yesterday's. But please make sure you're watching it and paying attention. So first we're going to start with explaining. So if I have this type of scenario, notice that this says x is greater than or equal to 3. X is greater than 3. We have to understand what that's telling us to do. Or we may have to look at this and identify which one is the right answer to it. So when I look at it and I see that this one has a dot, it says that a filled circle or a point on the line means that it will include that number. An open circle means that it's not going to include that number. The arrows then tell me everything else that will be included. So it could be 3, or it could be anything bigger than 3. It could not be 3, but it could be anything bigger than 3. So the arrow depends on where the variable is. And where that variable is then, if the arrow is being pointed to it, then I know that the arrow is going to go left, which I don't have up there, but you're going to see here in just a second. If the arrow, once again, of the sign, is pointed away from it, then I know it's going to go right. And on both of these, the arrow points away from my variable. So I know that my number line is filled in to the right. So let's look at 4 examples that I had on the very first screen. And we're going to walk through it with all of these steps so we understand what is being said and how to write these before we actually get into the practice problems in the book. So right now you don't need your pencil unless you just want to write these down on a scrap piece of paper and to take notes and add it to your math folder. Because your math folder is a really good thing to have, especially on test day if you don't remember how to do it and it's not in your book. So I have 4 different ones that I'm going to explain or write out their inequalities and list what it's telling me. So the first one I'm going to start with is I'm going to start with the ones that have filled circles. And that filled circles means that it could include the number that's shown. So I know that, and I'm going to use the variable x. It doesn't tell me a certain variable. I know that x could be equal to -3 because that's a filled in circle. When I go to this one, it's a filled in circle. I once again know that x could be equal to -3. So those are the same, but notice that they're plotted completely different. So then I look at it. Well, if the variable is being pointed to, then the arrow will go to the left. And if the variable is pointed away from, then the arrow will go to the right. The arrow we're talking about is the red arrow on this line. And that one goes to the right. So the arrow would have to point away from it. So I know x is going to be greater than the -3. And since this one goes to the left, it goes to the left if the variable is being pointed to, then I know that that's the symbol I have to use, telling me that x is less than the -3. But then we have to write it correctly. So sometimes you may see these mixed together, but most of the time you're not going to see 2 of them side by side. You're going to see them combined like we saw in the last 2 videos and before Christmas break. You're going to see the greater than equal sign because we do have a math way of showing that. You're going to see instead of less than or equal to, you're going to see less than or equal to as one sign. So once again, the equal sign at the bottom tells me that that circle is filled in and it's solid because the number can be included. The variable is being pointed to, so I know that it has to be filled in to the right because it would include anything less than that -3. And this one's being pointed away from, so the arrow is pointed in. I think down here I said to the right, I meant the left. So looking at my video. So this one goes to the right because it's being pointed away from. Now I'm going to go to the next two. So this one says an open circle does not include the number. So when I look at that, I've got this one and this one, open circle, open circle. So I know I have to have a variable. Once again, I'm going to use x's. And whatever the number says on the number line, and that's a -2. So I have some relationship going on with x and -2. But it's not equal to it because it's not filled in. And down here is a +2, so I know I have a relationship between the x and the +2, but once again it's not filled in, so it's not equal to. Then I look at the arrows. This one points to the right, and if it's pointed to the right, then I know that my sign has to do what? Well, the variable is pointed away from when it's going to the right. So that's telling me that x is greater than the -2. And this one is being pointed to the left. So to the left. So I know that it has to have the arrow pointing to the x because it's less than, anything smaller than 2 that it can be equal to. So inequalities, once again, is any amount that holds true. So if I look at the number line, let's just go to this one. I know it could be equal to -3 because it's filled in, but it could be equal to 0, it could be equal to 3, it could be equal to 1,000,000 because it's to the right of the -3. On this one, I know that it cannot be equal to 2 because it's open. But as I follow my number line, it could be 1 or 0 or -1 or -1,000,000, whatever's to the left of the 2. So inequalities show me either how to write the inequality, or the inequality shows me how to graph it. So now let's look at what the book sets us up with. Forest fires are most likely to occur when the air temperature is greater than 60 degrees Fahrenheit. The inequality T is greater than, and I know it's greater because the arrow points to the smallest number therefore has to be 60. So T is greater than 60, represents the temperatures T in degrees Fahrenheit for which forest fires are most likely. Graph the solutions of the inequalities on a number line. So I'm not going to work through all of these because I don't want the video to get too long, but I'm just going to do what it says. If this is my inequality, I'm going to graph it on my number line that it gives me. I'm going to put a circle, and then I have to decide to fill it in or not where the number is that they give me, and they give me the number 60. It's not underlined, so it can't be equal to. So it's just going to be an open circle. So when I look at these steps, once again, I know that if it can be equal to it, I fill in my circle. We call it a point on number line. And if it cannot be equal to it, then it's an open circle. And that's what I'm going to use. And then I decide where to shade my line, where to fill it in. You just use your pencil and make it thicker, and I have to be able to tell that you did. If you make a perfect line on top of the black line in your book and I can't tell it's there, I can't count it correct. So it needs to be thicker. If you want to take a highlighter and use it on your lines, I'm fine with that. Or a crayon, a marker, something that doesn't bleed through your paper onto the other side. But then I will use this to figure out how I'm going to fill in the line. So I have to start with knowing if I'm using a circle or a dot. I'm using a circle because it cannot be equal to 60. So I put it on the number line. And then I need to figure out, well, the variable is being pointed away from, so I know that which side has to be filled in on my number line. It says T, one I'm solving for, has to be greater than 60. So I know that everything to the right has to be filled in. So you just fill it in, take your pencil, shade it darker, or you can even use a highlighter once again and put it on the line. Let's look at this one. Graph the solutions of the inequalities, y is less than 5. Once again, and figure out what's given to me. I'm given y is less than 5. I know it says y is less than because the arrow is pointing to the smallest number. Y has to be smaller. I'm going to graph my solutions on the number line that they give me. So when I look at it, I'm going to go through my steps once again. I'm going to decide, is it going to be a point, a filled in circle, or is it going to be an open circle? Can it include or can it not include? And then I know where to shade according to if the variable is being pointed to or pointed away from. So when I look at my inequality, it does not tell me that y can be equal to 5. So I know I'm going to put an open circle on the 5. And then the variable is pointing to it. If the variable is being pointed to, then the arrow will go left. So I start from my circle and I fill in the entire left. I can highlight it, I can use a marker that doesn't bleed through my paper, I can use my pencil, and I can shade it in. On this one, I have some underlined, right? So this one, W is less than or equal to. This one, N is greater than or equal to. So I have to locate my information. I have to decide what I'm going to use. Graph my solutions. For this one, Y or W is less than or equal to 8/10. So I start with my first question. I'm going to put in a circle that's filled in, or I'm just going to put a circle that's open. Well, it's underlined. So it can equal 8/10. So I'm going to put a whole circle. Now, don't make it difficult. Draw a circle, fill it in, shade it. Okay? So on my 8/10, I draw a circle, I fill it in. And then I look at how the arrow is pointing. The arrow is pointing to my variable. If the variable is being pointed to, then the arrow will point, it's going to go left. How do I know that? Because my answers, any quality that I put in as an answer, can be equal to 8/10 or less than, because the arrow is pointing to the smallest number. And on my number line, everything that's less than goes left. So I shade it in. On B, N is greater than or equal to -3. So I have to figure out, do I put a point that's filled in, or do I put an open circle? Well, if it can include, which it can because it says it can be equal to, once again, I put a solid circle. Where? At the -3. So I locate -3 on my number line. I fill in a circle. Draw it, shade it in. Then I decide which side of the circle is going to be shaded, highlighted, colored on. I don't care how you show it as long as it's correct. Well, I'm looking at it and it shows me that the arrow is pointed away from. So if the variable is pointed away from, then the arrow goes to the right. What that is saying is, in whatever quality and however many qualities I choose, have to be equal to -3 or greater than. And we know in negative numbers, the closer I get to 0, the greater the value, and positives are always greater than a negative value. So I know I'm going to shade in to the right. So we go to this one. This one, I'm given the graphed inequality, and now I have to write the inequality. So I'm going to go in reverse. I'm going to do what I explained on that very first screen. So write the inequality that's represented by this graph. So as I do it and I look at it, I know I have a -2. And I know I have some relationship to -2. Am I equal to -2? I'm not, right? Because it's not filled in. So I know I'm not equal to -2. But what am I equal to? Well, can be equal to, because it's an inequality. So if I just use X, I can put my arrow, let's say it's going to the left. So the arrow, now this is where some people get confused. The arrow doesn't point left because this is shaded in left. The arrow is always going to point to where it's supposed to. So I base where my arrow goes by this information, smallest number. has to be less than. So on this one, I set it up backwards purposely on this video to show you that it can point to the right and be shaded to the left. The way the arrow points, just in the problem, does not indicate the arrow shading. Where it points to or away from indicates the shading. If the arrow points to the variable, then I know the left side of the circle number is going to be shaded. If it points away from the variable, then I know I'm going to shade to the right because it means it's going to be greater than. Alright, so then I just write my inequality that -2 is indeed greater than, it is, it's the largest one that it could be. It's not equal to, it is larger than every possible answer for x. So now we do our practice problems. I'm first told to graph these three. Graph the inequality that m is, what's that say? It's pointing to the smallest number, so it's less than 15. So I'm going to decide, do I shade in a circle or have an open circle? Well, it's not equal to, and that's the only time I use a solid circle. I'm going to have an open circle, and I'm going to graph my inequality. So I locate 15, and I look, well, we'll look at those in just a second. So I graph my 15. It's an open circle, and then let's see, it's pointed to the m, so that tells me everything has to be less than. So once again, if it points to the variable, then I'm going to shade in the left of the circle on the number line, because it's everything that is smaller than. Any quality that would be true for that inequality. On this one, I have C is greater than or equal to, I know it's greater than because it's pointing away from the variable, -1.5. Well, let's see, 1.5. I have 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, negatives, positives. I don't have 1.5, so where's my 1.5? So if I have this type of scenario, for some of you, you see it quickly. You might want to label it though, just to make sure. You don't have to label the whole thing in every single tick mark, but the ones that you need. So when I look at it, and I'm talking about -1.5, I don't know where it goes if it's not labeled, unless I just see it and understand it. But if I take that extra time to label it, I'm going by half steps. -0.5, -1, -1.5, -2, -2.5, -3. This is the one I'm looking for. I know that it can be equal to it because it's underlined, so I'm just going to put that dot right where it's supposed to be on that number line. And then I have to think about what it's saying. C is greater than. It's pointing away from my variable. And if it's pointing away from my variable, then I know I'm going to shade everything to the right. It's going to be greater than it. It's going to be greater than the -1.5, and all of these possible answers are indeed greater than -1 5/10. Now number 3, I'm going to do something a little different. I'm actually going to enlarge it so we can look at exactly what it is that I'm talking about. So with this enlarged, supersized, I look at it, it says that B is less than or equal to 5/8. And when I look at the fractions they give me, I have a 4, a 2, an 8. And we're talking about comparing fractions. Well, I can't compare fractions, add fractions, or subtract fractions unless I have a common denominator. It tells me my denominator needs to be 8. So I could either look at it and say, well, 4 goes into 8 evenly, 2 goes into 8 evenly, and 4 goes into 8 evenly, and I can change those and still have to find my 5/8. Or I can look at it and say, well, if I count, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I have 8 tenth marks in that first measurement from 0 to 1. So I know automatically that those are going to be 8 out of how many, which is my denominator. 8/8. So 1/4 is the same thing as 2/8. And 1/2 is indeed the same thing as 4/8. And 1 whole is the same as 8/8. Those would match up. So what I'm looking for then is my 5/8 here. But what type of circle do I put there? Well, it says it's going to be less than or equal to. Since it's equal to, I know I have to put a solid circle. I have to put a solid point because it could include that. And then it's pointing to my variable, and if it points to my variable, it means it's less than, so it has to be shaded to the left. So all of the rest of the line would be shaded. If you didn't get all that written down, then please pause my video before you move on. Then we can continue on. Now, I'm only going to do a couple of these. 4 says to graph the inequality. Where am I graphing it? Now you see we're going to do some magic here. There's this new invention called graphite, and it's usually held inside of a plastic container or a wood container, and so we can draw with it. You know, I say that sarcastically, but I can't tell you how many students last year, when we were doing this as a class and we were doing the practice problems together, like, I don't have a line, I don't have a line. I know you don't have a line. You're going to draw a line. Now, the nice thing about drawing this line is I don't have to be real picky where my circle or my point goes, because they're not labeled. Right? So we do the magic trick, we draw our own lines for 4 and 6, and we'll be good to go. And then I decide, am I using a whole circle, or am I using a filled-in circle, a point, to represent my 2/3? Well, it's not underlined, is it? So I know I'm going to put an open circle. Well, where am I going to put it? I won't put it anywhere I want to. I like putting mine just in the center. So I put it in the center, and I'm good to go. I'm going to label it 2/3. All right? Now, what's my next step? So my next step is determining what side is going to be shaded in. So when I look at it, let's see. It says A is being pointed to. So the steps that you could have copied down if you wanted to off the board. A is being pointed to, which tells me to shade it to the left. What it's saying is A is always going to be less than 2/3. So I shade it to the left. And I'm good to go. On number 6, I have K is greater than or equal to 0.3 or 3/10. Once again, I draw my own line magically, and then I know I'm going to put what there. An open circle or a filled-in circle, which we call point. I just put a point, right? I have my filled-in circle because it says it's equal to. It could be, but not always having to be. So I know I'm going to then label it and then figure out which way to shade in. The arrow is pointing away from, and those steps that you could have written down and taken notes on is going to tell you to shade to the right, because it could be equal to 3/10, but it could be anything greater than 3/10 as well. So since it's pointing away from my variable, I shade my number line in to the right. On number 8, it says to write the inequality represented by this graph. So when I look at it, I see that I have a 6. I see that I have an open circle, and then it's shaded to the left. So let's see. I know I have X, which is my variable, and I'm going to shade to the left. That's what it says. So I need to have my symbol pointing where? Well, it's shaded to the left, so I know it's going to point to my variable. So X is less than 6. Now, here's a question for you. Could you have written 6 with the arrow pointing on the other side to the X? Yes, because that would say that 6 is greater than the X, which still says X is less than 6. So that could be written backwards as long as the arrow is pointing still to the X. And then on number 10, the inequality W is greater than or equal to 60 represents the wind speed W in miles per hour of a tornado. Graph the solutions, plural, possible answers, of the inequality on the number line. So, W is greater than or equal to 60. Let's see. So I have to have a circle that's filled in, right? Because it could be equal to 60. So I put that on my line. And then it's pointed away from, which tells me that it's any number greater than, because W is greater than. So I know I'm going to shade in to the right. And then I'm done. Now I skip the other ones because it's now your turn. I want you to do question 5, 7, 9, and 11. And then I'll give you the answers one by one. So pause the video, show your work, find your answers. If you make any mistakes, figure out why you made a mistake. Maybe you'll find out that I made a mistake. I've done plenty on all these videos, so it is always possible. So pause the video, do your work, and then push play, and we'll continue on. So hopefully you have your work for 5, 7, 9, and 11. So on 5 and 7, you had to start by writing and drawing magically your own lines, right? Because that has to be plotted. So hopefully you got this as your answer. You have your number line, you have an open circle, you label it -4, and then you shade it to the right. Because x is greater than, it's being pointed away from, which tells me to shade to the right, or it's any answer larger than, greater than the -4. It's open because there's not an underline or an equal portion for that symbol. On number 7, you should have drawn your line. It says that t is less than or equal to 6. So on this one, you put and label your 6, but you put a point, a solid circle, because it can be equal to 6. And it's pointing to the t, so if it's pointing to my variable, I know I shade to the left. When I shade to the left end, that includes everything that is less than and equal to a 6. What about number 9? So on number 9, you first had to figure out what this number was here when I was counting in my negative order, and it just skips a number. And I did it wrong, didn't I? Well, it doesn't surprise me, but I'm not going to stop at 26 minutes and redo the video. So, it should be a -7 is my answer. I apologize. So my x has to be greater than or equal to, I know greater than or equal to symbol because it's shaded to the right. And all of these values are indeed greater than my -7. I fill it in, or since it is filled in, then I know it's equal to underneath the greater than sign. You could, if you had a 7 and not a 6 like I do, also have it as -7 is less than or equal to whatever x is. Because it still says the same thing when I read it backwards. X is greater than or equal to -6. So it could be written either way as long as the arrow is pointed away from the variable in either way that you wrote it. Number 11 then. Hopefully you figured out you had to do some math first. I can't plot or graph an equation mathematically on a number line. I have to solve for it. So all you had to do was 12 divided by 3, which should have found 4 for you. And then once you have 4, then you know that C is less than 4, and it can't be a filled in circle, it has to be an open circle because it has to be less than. So you put an open circle above the 4, and anything that's smaller than, since it's pointing to the C, goes to the left. So this isn't a difficult lesson really, as long as you follow these steps and then you think about them every single time. A little longer than yesterday's video, but I wanted to really review a lot of this information before we get into the next 2 extra lessons, where we're really going to be doing several different things that we've worked on in the past. Using algebraic equations, so solving for. We might have some integers on there on the second day, and putting it all together to graph and write inequalities. Not difficult as long as we pay attention to what we have been doing. Tomorrow though, you're going to start on your test. I'll give you the entire class period to get it done, to ask me any questions to solve it. I'm actually going to let you take it home this time. Work on it at home. But what I ask is that you're honest about it and you don't ask your parents for help. I'm giving you your book. I'm giving you your glossary in your book. I'm giving you any notes that you've taken, and I'm giving you my videos. I'm giving you a whole day to get it done. Then when you turn it in the next day, I will grade them and we'll move forward into the next lesson. So if you have any questions while doing this, after you've watched the video and written your notes, then please come and ask.